Yes, all the nerves are all getting excited, and I'm not even down there at the moment. But no, I'd love to be down there, but that's the way it goes. I couldn't help it, so...
Hard man to beat, Andrew Johnson, at the moment, Gary, with the form he's showing.
Yeah, he's right on top at the moment. He's just got everything, all his act together and everything. He's just firing really good.
There's Len Willing on 49 as we look through some of the field. John Morgan on 86, Ron Bolden on his new 500 Yamaha, 59. 53, Kim Colby, the former C grader, upgraded to B grade for Bathurst, had a fall at the first round at Symmons Plains at the same spot as you, Gary, and the hairpin at the end of the straight.
Yes, I sort of fell down there.
And there's Andrew Johnson on 7. And they're going off now for what will be 2 warm-up laps. Among the other runners, 96, Graham Muir, who also had a lot of problems down in Tasmania, has got his bike running much better now. The Jeff Taylor entered Yamaha 750. So we can look for a better performance from him. Graham Muir on 96. Graham Geddes has a brand new Yamaha 500, and John Smales, I didn't see whether it formed up on the grid.
I didn't notice it either, Will, but if it is on the grid, they'll be using it in this race as very much a warm-up for the 500cc senior race later in the day. Geddes has had a lot of difficulty with this 500cc bike so far this weekend. His gearbox packed up pretty mightily yesterday in practice. They went back to the workshop last night, attempted to repair the existing gearbox and couldn't. So they pulled $15,000 out of their pocket and bought a brand new motorcycle, brought it out here today to practice it, only to discover that it too has gearbox problems, and they're back to where they started from, a $15,000 gearbox later.
Well, as Ron Angel says, we've spent 30 grand and we're still not in the race. Which is very bad luck, because the talent of Graham Geddes on one of these new 500 Yamahas, the same as Ron Bolden's, would have been something to see. Bolden took it to a first-up victory in the 500 race at Bathurst, the Grand Prix there, but then was leading at Symmons Plains when he slipped sideways, ran off the track and looked to be safe to ride off the grass in his own time, because the grass was wet and very slippery. But unbeknownst to everybody who was watching on television and to Ron, there was a ditch hidden in front of him and he came adrift. That's Lee Roebuck on 20. Lee riding one of the TZ 750s and having only his 3rd ride on the bike. Bathurst was his first, Symmons the 2nd, and this the 3rd. And he says the 30-year-old former 125cc title holder and runner-up in the 250 and 3rd in the 350 all in the same year, said that he's getting more used to it all the time and looking forward to better performances. Quite a big field of both 750 bikes, with the reappearance of such as Len Willing on 49, but also Steve Trinder's brand new bike, or it's only a few weeks old, his RG 500 Mark V Suzuki, but has had a number of successful outings, a win over Bolden at Oran Park and several wins last weekend in Victoria at Winton. In
fact, Trinder in this race will be on a Yamaha 750, which he's borrowed from his father. His father bought it from the Millage team, which was disbanded at the beginning of this year. His father, about 45 years of age, rides in C-grade events, and whenever Steve feels like it, he simply says, "Dad, may I borrow the bike to ride in the Australian Championships?"
Here, Ron Bolden. Yes, Trinder's doing that to spare the working the Suzuki too hard so he can use it for the 500 race, so it'll be a while before we see that. And there's Geddes with the KLM sticker on the back of the Yamaha 500, so it's on the line, bike number 4.
Ready to go.
And some fudging there, and should have brought them back perhaps, but away they jump. And it is a good field. There's young Steve Wood, the West Australian on 111, the blue and yellow leathers. And the man running away is, I think, Len Willing. Len Willing into the lead in front of Johnson and Lee Roebuck. Johnson on 7, Roebuck on 20. And it's Len Willing into the lead, but Johnson under him. And then RG 500 Suzuki slipping into 2nd place. And a pretty crowded start, Gary Coleman.
Yeah, it always gets pretty hectic down the bottom end of the straight, but everyone seems to sort themselves out all right.
So
the bike's now into the S's. Johnson in the lead. Behind him, Trinder, trying everything he can. But Johnson desperate to win this race. He's relying on the prize money from the race to keep racing his motorcycle in the Australian Championship, and nothing will stop him. This is the bike on which Greg Pretty, the defending Australian champion, who of course is overseas this year, won last year's championship on, and it's the bike that holds the lap record here at Adelaide International Raceway. Down the chute, getting up to 260 kilometres an hour. Andrew Johnson tucked in tight. Behind him, Trinder trying, but he can't match the pace of Johnson down the chute. Peels off now into the right-hander.
Steve Trinder tucked in there, the 24-year-old. Johnson, 23 years old, but greatly handicapped, although you wouldn't know it in his riding, by his left arm and hand as the bike goes sideways there. And Gary Coleman, when these 750s step sideways, they're a big handful.
When they go, they've gone, usually.
Johnson, very, very hard charging at this stage, determined to justify his sign-up recently with the Pitmans team for the remainder of the year. He had a one-ride basis on the bike for Bathurst, won the Unlimited Grand Prix. It was extended to another ride in the first round of the Australian titles in Symonds Plains in Tasmania, won there, and finally he's got his way, the determined 23-year-old Victorian, and has got a season's contract now on the Pitmans bike, because Pitmans like to sponsor South Australians and to develop the sport here, but they know that in Johnson they've got probably the best man in the unlimited class at the moment. Gary Coleman might disagree with me on that, and that's very hard on Gary, because like a lot of the unlimited riders, he suffers from lack of money, because these bikes are very expensive to run.
There's Graham Muir there, challenging Trinder now for second position. As you can see, the superior pace of the Andrew Johnson machine already opening a gap on the second place riders. Johnson comes up onto the speed bowl.
And behind them, incidentally, it's Len Willing on 49, Lee Roebuck on 20, Ron Bolden on 59, and on 95. Sorry, we'll come back on that number, but Steve Wood in behind that in 111. But Johnson, the race leader, in this 18-lap race, 43 kilometres.
Johnson looks behind him, trying to find out where the opposition is. It's nowhere to be seen, Andrew. You're pretty right. Johnson has the bike for the rest of the Australian Road Racing Championship, but he doesn't have it with totally full sponsorship. As a matter of fact, he's budgeted $6,000 of his prize winnings towards maintenance of the motorcycle himself. For example, he gets the spares at cost from Pitman's Yamaha. He pays for his own tyres and his own transportation. And that's a lot of money for a young man to fund himself. So far this year on the bike, however, he's made $5,500 hard-earned dollars. And there, in second position now, is Graham Muir, having passed Steve Trinder on the borrowed Yamaha TZ750. Now Muir will try and open the gap from Trinder and try and close it on Johnson, but that would seem a fairly difficult task, because Johnson's bike is just so good, and Johnson has proved himself so capable on it in the last few months.
The 500cc bikes on many circuits capable of staying with the bigger and more powerful 750s, which Gary are developing around 120 brake horsepower.
Yeah, the 750s are anything from around 120 to 140, depending on what modifications or what pipes you have on certain circuits and that, but around that mark, which is a lot of horsepower for a bit over 300-pound motorbike.
But on this circuit, that long straight makes the difference, where the 750 can really get into stride.
Yeah, the 750 has a lot of torque over the 500. The 500 is just a little bit harder to ride. You've got to keep them right on song all the time. And Ron Bolden was telling me he's been having trouble. This is his biggest changeover from the 750 to the 500's been that problem.
Well, in fact, there's quite a different cornering technique required on the 750s, where you tend not to take a classic line into and out of corners, but more rush up, crank it over, and then straighten it up and power out.
Yeah, what we sort of say, we sort of turn them over and hope for the best. That's what we work it out at.
Well, Johnson's hoping for the best in grand style as he marches off in first place there on number 7. The left arm there, handicapped, and Johnson uses the clutch as little as possible with that left hand, which was badly mangled in a bulldozer accident some 7 years ago. And the other anxiety in Johnson's life at the moment is his wife, who's 4 days overdue with their first child, which Andrew desperately hopes will be a girl rather than a boy, and hopes to get back to Melbourne tomorrow. Well, we'll be back there, but hopes that she hasn't had it before then. She's in hospital at the moment, awaiting the birth of their first child.
Well, in fact, he's flying out tonight especially to be with her. He said she can't have the baby until he gets there. He desperately wants to do so. the closest watch pregnancy in Australia, actually. It all started at Bathurst when we first became aware of it, and we've followed the trials of Jan and the baby, now in Panch, the hospital in Victoria, through Launceston and through Oran Park as well. And there's the gap back to second place. Graham Muir in second place, and Johnson, if anything, backing off, conserving the motorcycle somewhat and letting Graham Muir get close. Now, that doesn't mean Muir isn't trying. As you saw from the way he came on to the right-hand corner there, he's trying very hard indeed. In third place, Steve Trinder. Knee touching the ground there. Trinder, a very volatile rider, not been known to back off in a tricky situation. And a man with a great potential in motorcycle racing in Australia. It's Johnson again, coming up onto the speedball.
Behind Trinder in fourth place, Ron Bolden, 59. Behind him is Len Willing on 49, Lee Roebuck on 20, Kim Colby on 53, Steve Wood on 111, and on number 12 is John Warrior, the Queenslander, who yesterday fell off and wiped the carburetors off the side of his RG500 Mark II Suzuki, but was able to borrow bits locally from a very friendly competitor and get out onto the circuit today. But here's Johnson, who hasn't really put a foot wrong for a long time.
And yet he's riding terribly, terribly quickly. The lap record stands at 57.1 seconds to Greg Quiddy on this motorcycle. Johnson has just done a 57.8. Now, yesterday in practice, he couldn't better 58 seconds. He says the full second between what Quiddy can do on the bike and what he can do on the bike all lies in the speedball to which he's coming now. Pretty, the South Australian rider, is the master of the speedball. He can get this bike in a two-wheel drift all the way around the speedball and hold it right on the edge of disaster. Johnson, however, takes it a little easy around there, but in fact he's going quicker than he did yesterday and possibly taking just a few more risks, which isn't wise in the circumstances because he seems to have the race sewn up.
Johnson, the defending 500cc Australian champion, fifth in the 750 class last year, behind the winner, Greg Pretty, Ron Bolden second place, Rick Perry third, and Gary Coleman in fourth place. And doing a grand job, though. We're starting with his win in the Unlimited Grand Prix at Bathurst over Ron Bolden on the 750 Yamaha, and really coming to general notice then. He's been well known within the sport. And I think it's really sharpened his perseverance and his determination, Gary, to do well now.
Yeah, he seems to have, he's got that initial start this year, and now that he's got it, he wants to make the best of it, and I think his riding sort of shows that coming out.
Certainly has been doing everything well. Graham Muir, who had such a wretched race in Tasmania, blowing smoke all the time from number 96. But that faulty crankcase has been repaired. The gearbox oil's now staying in the gearbox. And Graham Muir's showing the form of which he is capable and running a very nice second position at this stage.
Muir's opened quite a gap, in fact, to Steve Trinder on the Yamaha 750. There are two Trinder brothers riding in this race today. Young Craig Trinder, who's 17 years of age, is having his first run in an Australian Championship, having been upgraded only at this meeting to B grade after winning 4 races at the Winton meeting last weekend in C grade capacity. So that means that there are now 3 Trinders racing in Australia. Their father, Graham, is a C-grade rider and races occasionally in club meetings. And there's the leader, Andrew Johnson, as Graham Muir passes a lap rider onto the speedball.
Perhaps some trouble with the Ron Bolden TZ500 Yamaha number 59, John, because he's dropped back behind both Lee Roebuck and Len Willing. Roebuck on 20 and Willing on 49. So that Bolden is now in 6th place, just in front of Kim Colby on 53.
Bolden, of course, terribly anxious to win the Australian Senior Road Racing Championships for 500cc machines on this new bike. If he is striking difficulties, he'll probably treat the rest of this 18-lap race as a development session for the 500, which will be in 2 races' time.
Just watching the bike bumping there, Gary Coleman. The circuit's very rough in parts. Perhaps you'd like to take us round as you would in the seat of number 52, a virtually identical bike to the 750 number 7 that's leading.
Well, Andrew would just be changing the 3rd gear at the moment, and depending on how fast the motorbike is, Andrew will be coming around there in 3rd gear at the moment, just on power, and we'll hold that all the way out.
Then driving it hard now.
Driving it hard. He'll be into 4th now. possibly change fifth now. Let's look around. Sixth gear now.
An
And flat
incredible
on the
rush
tank.
of speed at this stage.
Full on brakes.
What does it feel like when you sit up into the slipstream at that sort of speed?
Oh, and it's an incredible feeling. You realise then how fast you're going. Be round to second gear now.
Delicate throttle balance there.
Very delicate in second gear on a 750. Up to third gear.
Every time he comes round that right-hander, he seems to have a bit of a wobble.
There's a bit of a repatching tar job done on the way out, so it sort of knocks the bikes around a bit.
Here's a difficult section. Through the S's and hard brakes.
Very difficult. Very difficult.
And the reverse camber.
Round to third gear again, and back we go again.
How difficult the reverse camber, particularly on a bike like the 750.
What tends to happen is the front wheel, you don't sort of know where it is. The off camber really catches you out. You've got to be very, very careful there.
Could fall away at the front in no time.
Exactly. And once you've got the front wheel around, then you've got to worry about 120 horsepower on the back wheel when you do get it around. So it's a lot of
A
problems.
very delicate art, Gary.
Yeah, very delicate. But Andrew seems to be riding very well at the moment. He's got everything under control.
12 laps down, 6 remaining in this up to 1300cc second round of the Australian Road Racing Championship. Andrew Johnson going for maximum points. He won the first round in Tasmania and therefore took 15 points from Steve Trinder on 12 and Lee Roebuck on 10. If he can win this race, he'll have a maximum 30 points with 4 rounds remaining.
A round in each state of the Australian Road Racing Championships, and then for each class. 125, 250, 350, 500 and 750cc, and then two side classes, 500 and unlimited, which mostly are 750, as we look at Graham Muir, still holding second place on 96.
Sixth in the first round of the title at Launceston, so he again will be going for 12 points, which will give him a fairly comfortable second place, depending on where Trinder finishes in the race. And by the looks of that, Trinder's a long way back down the main straight now, as Graham Muir powers that big bike down the chute.
Fair clump of bikes further back, behind both second placed Muir on 96 and third placed Steve Trinder on 60, but Bolden and Willing and Roebuck and Colby are well and truly stuck into it behind this group. We might try and have a look at them if we can. Johnson again onto the speed bowl on 7. But the other group just, in fact, about midway down the straight at this stage.
Johnson, at the end of the Australian Road Racing Championship this year, to relinquish the Yamaha 750 he's now riding, so that Greg Pretty may ride it in the Swan Series, the 4-round series, which occurs in November, December at the end of this year.
And Greg Pretty, after the bad luck of a fall at Donington Park and a broken ankle, was scheduled to be riding this weekend at Brands Hatch, where he's now out of the cast on his ankle and hopeful to be there. We're looking at Steve Wood on 111, the West Australian, who's leading the 500 class over there. But Pretty hoping to be running this weekend at Brands Hatch, nearly fully fit again after his fall at Donington, and is on £750, $1,500 start money for Isle of Man, which starts on the 1st of June.
Quite an incredible story about Pretty. In fact, when he fell off, he found himself down on his financial luck, and the good people of Adelaide, through their radio stations, took up a subscription and sent several $1,000s to England to help him on his way. The Adelaide people, of course, magnificent motorcycle supporters. They come out here in their droves to watch motorcycling, and they've done a wonderful job to make their local hero Greg Pretty, get back on the road to recovery in Britain.
And there's Bolden battling with Len Willing. Len Willing on the 750 Yamaha 49. Bolden on the 500 Yamaha, the brand new bike, $14,000 worth, number 59. That's a 500cc bike. And in behind them too, the dicing's pretty hectic. They've been swapping places all through the race.
They're dicing for 4th and 5th position now, almost the length of the straight behind. There's 2 riders down being treated.
That's Kim Colby on 53. He was in this group. He was on the tail end of it, in behind the now remaining one in the group there with Bolden and Len Willing, and that's Lee Roebuck on 20. But this is Kim Colby, 53.
There's your leader, Andrew Johnson. Up onto the speed bowl.
And Colby...
3 laps remaining.
Gary Coleman, Colby down in Tasmania, and perhaps was still just a little bit to learn about, I suppose, the most essential art of 750cc bike riding, throttle control.
Yes, he won the Unlimited B grade at Bathurst by miles, but of course the 750 had a distinct power advantage over everything else that was there. But Kim's still got a fair bit to learn about, as you say, the throttle control of a 750.
There's this dice again. Bolden, now in front of Len Willing. Len Willing, the younger brother of Warren Willing, the so talented Australian race tuner and former bike rider who was the innocent victim in a horrific crash in Northern Ireland. And now Willing going underneath Bolden. No. Tucks in behind him, so Bolden leads him into the right-hander off the end of the straight. And a great scrap there, and being enthusiastically watched by you, Gary, a good braking duel.
Yeah, Ron's really good on the brakes, and the 500 Yamaha's really good on the brakes. Like, so light and handles so well. But I'd like to see Ron go good in this race because he's been trying hard all weekend, and they've had a few little problems with the bike. So,
as we go back to Andrew Johnson, crossing the line to the blue flag, out on his final lap in this 18-lap race. So it's certainly providing nothing funny crops up in the next 2.4 kilometres, or now a little bit less than that. Going to be a very untroubled win for Andrew Johnson. They don't come much easier than that, quite frankly, Gary.
No, he's had a good easy run, but he's sort of made it that easy himself, though. He put the pressure on early and pulled away from the rest of the field, and he's held that lead. So
Johnson on 7. Leading from Muir, still solid there in second place on 96. Steve Trinder third on 60, and then that battle. Bolden 59, Len Willing 49, Lee Roebuck 20, and then the West Australian Steve Wood on 111. We follow Johnson round to the last corner, the speedball. Officially known, the entry part as Motorcraft, the exit as Stillwell Corner, and to the checkered flag for 23-year-old Andrew Johnson. And the next task in the life of this talented motorcycle racer is to the bedside of his wife, back in Victoria in the birth of their first child, he hopes, tomorrow.
Andrew Johnson, now on 30 points in the Australian Unlimited Championship. Second in today's race was Graham Muir on the Yamaha, and that gives him now third place in the Australian Championship on 17 points. Third place today was Steve Trinder on the Yamaha, and that elevates him to second position in the Australian Championships on 22 points.
Just coming up there to a lapped rider, Paul McMenamin, on number 97, lapped because he was on a 350cc Yamaha, only half the capacity, virtually half the engine of the 750 bike. It was interesting, Gary, when they first developed what was started off as a 700 Yamaha and then 750 by virtually putting two engines together. We'll come back to that after we've heard from Andrew Johnson and from Malcolm McDonald.
Greg Hansford, of course, the winner from Queensland, now from the state of Victoria. Andrew Johnson just pulling up here at our interview point. And maybe we might be able to move out here just to get a word with Andrew. Just get rid of some of the gear. And Andrew will be with us right now on ABC Sport. Andrew, congratulations on your fine run here this afternoon.
Thank you very much.
Must be fairly hard work wrestling that big machine all around this track.
Yes, it is pretty hard, Yakka. Makes it a lot easier when the machine's so well set up. The preparation is just unbelievable.
And you've really got it going well by the looks of things.
Oh yes, but it takes a whole team. Pitman Yamaha have to be one of the best.
Andrew, during the course of that race, our commentators have been talking about the happy event that might be coming up tomorrow.
Yes, hopefully it's tomorrow and maybe today. I hope I can get home in time for tomorrow.
You're flying back to Melbourne tonight to be with your wife?
Straight after the race meeting I'll fly
good
back.
luck to you, Andrew, and all the very best for the rest of the meeting.
Thank you very much.
And now our next event's going to be the 1300cc sidecar event, and a short while ago.
40 kilometres an hour, then up through the gears for the back straight, reaching a maximum speed of about 210 to 220 kilometres an hour as they come down through the gears for the Uni Royal S's, getting back to first gear for BP corner, the hard left-hand corner that takes them up onto the Motorcraft Bowl, which you see this rider going through now, taken in third gear at approximately 180 kilometres an hour, and then they fling themselves down the main straight once again. With me in the main commentary position, former Australian champion and one of the leaders of the World Motor Racing Series, Greg Hansford. Greg, what sort of problems are the riders facing today? What are the challenges for Graham Crosby on the Formula One bike against the 750cc Grand Prix machines?
Well, John, I think Graham's going to have his work cut out here for him more than the previous two rounds at Oran Park and Surfers Paradise, because this straight here is much longer than those two circuits, where top speed is more important, and the Yamahas seem to have a bit more top speed than the bike Crosby's on.
There's a very crisp headwind facing the riders down the straight. How will that hamper them?
It will be more of a disadvantage to Crosby on the big Suzuki. The 750 Yamahas are much more streamlined with their better fairings and the better designed windscreens than the bike that Graham's on.
The heat today is getting up towards 30 degrees Celsius. It will be very hard on tyres.
Should be very hard. Yesterday they predicted only 22 degrees, but it's come up to just over 30 degrees, I believe, and the circuit here, it's a very dark surface on the circuit, and it holds the heat very well, and they could have a few tyre problems.
The bikes come back onto the grid, lining up for the first heat, a 12-lap heat. Will Hagen has the lap times, the practice times.
Graham Crosby's taken pole position. As we look at Ron Haslam there, who was fifth fastest on official practices yesterday. There's Jeffrey Sale on 10. Gary Coleman, 52. Lee Roebuck on 20. Ron Bolden, 59. But Crosby took pole with a 58.2. But the man that went faster than that later in the day, but not counting for grid positions, was Steve Trinder on the team Taylor 750 Yamaha. He did a 57.4, just 0.3 of a second slower outside Pretty's lap record.
And dramas occur. Greg Pretty has arrived back from the two warm-up laps and finds himself on the second row of the grid, squeezed out from his rightful place on row 1. He will not be happy about that. Beside him also on the second row is Dave Aldana, also riding a 750cc Yamaha, loaned to him by Pretty's people, Yamaha Pitmans. But Pretty seems content now. He's going to start from the second row, which won't please him at all. Glenn Dix moves towards the starting lights, and they're gone.
Pretty got boxed in and he couldn't see the green light either. So,
but look at Aldana start. Aldana straight from the second row of the grid and straight into the lead position. What a fantastic start from Dave Aldana, the American.
That's been headed as they go into the right-hander. The field bunching up with him. 16 riders, some of the country's best and two of the world's best. In among them, Graham Crosby, the world champion on Formula One bikes this year. Ron Haslam leading there, the 1959 world champion on Formula One motorcycles. Into the back part of the circuit they go. 998cc Honda, putting out about 130 brake horsepower, race frame, and Haslam, as Muir goes underneath into second place, seeing Aldana back to third. So Graham Muir, who practiced very quickly yesterday with a good set of tyres on his TZ 750 Yamaha, and forging forward is Greg Pretty, the local hero, on 64.
In fifth position, Graham Crosby. But there goes Pretty now, leading Aldana.
Crosby tucked in behind two, only 2 places back, one between him and Pretty. Muir into the lead though, over Haslam.
And Aldana snatches back third place with Pretty.
The American very unhappy with the superbike that he ran in the 2 previous rounds, getting onto this 750 Yamaha for this meeting, which Pitmans have done an enormous amount of work on since last Wednesday. And they too, of course, have seen Pretty's bike, the bike that won him the series last year.
Graham Muir training that Yamaha TZ 750 right over. The Albury-Wodonga rider riding so well here today.
26 years old, been campaigning that bike now for about 18 months, doing a good job, but always handicapped by lack of budget for the critical area, particularly of tyres, as he ranges up Crosby on Aldana. Let's see the speed difference here between a 750 Yamaha and Crosby's big 1000cc bike. He wrecked the 1100 motor on that bike last week at Surfers, and there's Pretty in second place now, looking at Graham Muir.
There's Crosby up into third position. Aldana right behind him. Muir in the lead. Pretty now starting to breathe down his exhaust pipes. Behind them, Haslam, Crosby. Crosby dropped a valve yesterday afternoon in practice when he over-revved, has replaced all 8 valves in the bike, hasn't had a chance to run them in, he's doing so right now.
But Muir from Pretty, with Pretty closing on the bowl that he knows so well as a South Australian resident who's ridden hundreds of laps here at Adelaide International Raceway. He's the local hero. He won the series last year, but fell heavily at Donington Park earlier this year as a 25-year-old, grimly determined Adelaide resident tucks in there, now pops up under brakes, and as you can see, is making ground on Muir. Beautiful riding from Pretty, who says he's very pleased with his form because he's had a bad year, and he got back here on the 14th of August, went into hospital on the 29th to have his shoulder done, and he said if the series had started a couple of weeks earlier, he doesn't think his shoulder would have been strong enough to let him ride the way he's riding now. It's not 100%, but he says it's not worrying him when he rides.
Now, watch how Pretty comes onto the bowl. He is the fastest man through this speed bowl. Look at him catching Muir. But Muir's got his measure higher on the bowl now. Chops down tight and powers out back onto the straight.
Greg Hansford, what can Graham Crosby do trying to catch these Yamahas running away on speed on the main straight?
Nothing
As Greg Pretty hits the lead.
He can't do much at all, Will. He's just got to sit there and hope that he can stay with them. He's being held up a bit there by Haslam and Aldana, but if he can get past those two, he might have some sort of a chance of catching them up. But if he lets them get too far in front, he's going to have a big job in front of him to make that ground up.
Already Pretty has equalled the fastest practice time of yesterday, 57.4, but that was set by Trinder as we see Crosby third.
So Crosby now out in pursuit of Muir. And closing the gap is Crosby. There's Aldana back in 5th slot. He was on a Kawasaki Superbike for the first 2 rounds of the series, found it not fast enough and not well enough developed, and got onto this Yamaha for the last 2 rounds here and at Sandown Park next weekend. Pretty comes off the bank.
And of course in front of him on number 7 is Steve Trinder, the fastest man in practices yesterday, and the man that beat Crosby in one of the heats at Oran Park. The other man that's beaten Crosby in the series so far is this man in the lead, Greg Pretty, who won one of the heats at Surfers last weekend, and with some very audacious riding. And Greg Pretty is the defending champion in the from the 1979 series, and we were talking to him earlier.
With me now, Greg Pretty from South Australia, the winner of the Swan Series in 1979 with a grand total of 95 points. Greg, you're the only South Australian rider in contention for the series this year. You give yourself a chance with the final round coming up next week.
There's a rider down at the back of the circuit. We don't know at this stage who it is. An ambulance went with him at this stage. Greg Hansford, not a good circuit to fall on. A lot of concrete wall around.
Especially on that corner, John, they've got an Armco fence, as you can see, with those white painted tyres stacked up in front of it, but he'd be going very, very fast there where he came off.
The ambulance now coming to assist the rider. We'll try to find out who it is as the racing continues.
That's in the back section of circuit where they've come down to brake for the reverse camber onto the straight. He slid wide there off into the grass and towards the wall.
There's Pretty.
And that was Graham Muir that fell on 96, the original race leader.
What bad luck for Graham Muir because he was riding so well in this event. And now Pretty is in the lead with Crosby in 2nd position.
No, it's not Graham Muir, that's wrong. Graham Muir's holding 2nd place, being hassled by Crosby at the moment. Aldana's 4th, a bit distant from Crosby, with Ron Bolden 5th on 59. Gary Coleman 52 is next. Dennis Neal then next on 4.
And Crosby now pulls out to pass Graham Muir, but Muir slams the gate shut on him as they go down the end of the straight, and Muir still holds 2nd position. Another bike off. And is that Pretty? That's Greg Pretty. He's down. Greg Pretty has crashed at the end of the main straight.
Come off the bike. Greg Pretty, the race leader. And Crosby now is the new race leader with Graham Muir behind him. So furious pace here. Two of the riders down, including the race leader, Greg Pretty.
Greg Hansford, we noticed Pretty's bike jumping around under brakes before. Did he have a problem with the machine?
I don't know, John. It looked like he was trying awfully hard in those first couple of laps. The bike was leaving the ground when he was braking very heavily there. But he's had trouble, I think, keeping the thing in a straight line going into the braking area and when he started to make the turn for the corner.
Well, the bad news is that it's Steve Trinder, who fell before, so that the people lying second and third in the series at this stage, Pretty and Trinder, both out of this race. The race leader and the series leader, Graham Crosby, on the Formula One Suzuki, running the smaller motor now, awaiting parts from Japan to rebuild the 1100 motor for next weekend at Sandown.
There's Pretty down, the ambulanceman treating him now. Moving his legs up, seeing if his bones are in one piece. I would assume that they are.
Well, poor Greg Pretty has probably had a lot of the wind knocked out of him on that fall. And under good care there as we look in the speed bowl at the race leader, the style of the world champion on this class of motorbike, and the brilliant form behind him of Graham Muir, the Albury rider, as is Steve Trinder on number 96.
Graham Crosby holds 38 points in the series. And with these two major opponents down, second place in the series now is likely to be taken over by Gary Coleman, the Newcastle rider, who's fourth in the series up until now on 27 points.
Greg Hansford, what's the chances of Graham Muir staying with or even perhaps passing Crosby?
Probably not very much at this stage. I think the longer the race goes on, it'll be better for Graham because I think he's a much smoother rider, easier on machinery and tyres, and the further the race progressed, I think the harder Graham would find it, Graham Muir that is, to stay with Graham Crosby.
Crosby down on the banking again.
John Pace, unfortunately, was thrown off his bike yesterday too, and has had a broken ankle pinned in hospital yesterday. Crosby down the straight and has completed 10 laps, is out on his second last lap now. Graham Crosby, the leader on C. Graham Muir there on the Taylor-owned bike, the Australian sidecar champion. Jeff Taylor owns that TZ750 that Graham Muir, the 26-year-old Albury rider, is riding.
Another 12-lap leg of the Swan Insurance Series on later this afternoon, and it will be a crucial point now as to whether Greg Pretty and Steve Trinder can repair both themselves and their bikes in time to get out for the second round this afternoon. Bike 96, Graham Muir, the Albury-Wodonga rider, in second position. Onto the banking, quite a way behind Graham Crosby now.
Pretty hectic race and a number of leaders. This was one of them, but he's going to finish second as Crosby now gets the blue flag to announce he's started his final lap. Up the main straight he goes. Have a look at a big 1000cc Suzuki building up to about 280 kilometres an hour as he starts to brake. The news on Greg Pretty was that he had equalled his lap record before he came down. He, one of the race leaders, as was Muir, and now Crosby leading as they go on to the final lap.
A lot of tension building before the start of this race. Greg Hansford, have you known such tension in Australian motorcycle racing before?
No, John, this series, the Swan Series as it is at the moment, has brought together the best riders and the best machinery from overseas. You're just looking at their Crosby's bike at the moment, the exotic bike here at the moment. The atmosphere is terrific, and it's the best racing I think Australian people have seen for many, many years.
Crosby now comes down to take the checkered flag. Started Glendix out. There goes the checkered flag. Graham Crosby takes the first leg of the third round of the Swan Insurance Series from Graham Muir in second position. Then Aldana in third position. Only just. Dave Aldana in third position.
In front of Ron Bolden, followed by Gary Coleman and Dennis Neal were the following finishers.
Graham Crosby, congratulations, a fantastic race there in that first heat. Pretty hot out there, is it?
Yeah, it's too bloody hot for me, I can tell you.
Yeah, that's tremendous, and it was pretty crowded going to that first bend. Where were you situated right at that time?
Unfortunately, I think I was about in the middle, and it makes it a bit awkward. You know, I got stuck behind a couple of guys, and it was a bit awkward passing right at the start with new tyres and so forth. But everybody sorted themselves out and got going, and it was okay. You know, but it's just getting us sorted out so everybody can get going. You know,
Graham Muir set a blistering pace there at the beginning, didn't he? You didn't see much of him.
I didn't. He must have changed his leathers. I didn't realise who it was, and he was going away. I thought, what the hell's going on here?
Yeah,
it's great.
Oh, fantastic. Bad luck about the fall, but I believe both riders are okay. Steve Trinder and Greg Pretty, I believe they're both okay.
Yeah, that's great.
Afternoon of the Swan Insurance Series.
Good news then. There's Gary Coleman there with the sunglasses, wanders forward, Dennis Neal's bike being wheeled into place. Graham Muir in the yellow and black. Let's have a look at the points at the end of the first leg. This making the fifth leg, as we've had 2 legs in each of the previous 2 rounds.
Yesterday in practice, and Ronnie Haslam on the big Honda pulled out and passed him at the end of the straight, and well, that's not right. He should have been able to stay well in front of the big bike.
Lee Roebuck 20, Graham Muir 96, went so well in the first race. Colby 53 further back. Greg Pretty, Dennis Neal on 4, Coleman on 52, Ron Bolden on 59. You see Pretty back there, looking, I think, perhaps even to do a bit of a running start, but Glenn Dix has warned that there'll be a black flag for anybody who tries to jump the start, gets moving before the green light shows. Ron Bolden should really have gone better in this series than he's gone so far. A bit detuned, but in a business sense, going incredibly well. There's Gary Coleman, still with a 2 on his helmet, which showed he was number 2 rider in the Castrol 6-hour to Bolden on a 650 Yamaha. That's Crosby, Haslam, then Graham Muir again. Muir, you remember, was the early leader in the race. Kim Colby, couple of riders still to return to the starting grid, as an anxious number of riders are already formed up.
And the news is that Aldana stalled out on the track, so he did not even make the starting grid of this race.
But Greg...
Here he comes in now, just rolling in to take his place on the second row of the grid. Dave Aldana on bike 64.
So 12 riders ready to start the 6th leg, the last of the 3rd round of the Swan International Series for 1980, the 3rd year in which it's been run. And Aldana coming up onto the front row with a starter with his back turned.
Now that's Pretty. Pretty is coming up because he's on Aldana's bike.
And they're away. And Pretty almost the only one that got a legitimate start, which was a bad one as everybody else jumped. Haslam up front on H. But Pretty did wait for the green light, but very few of the others did. A really edgy start by everybody as they zoomed away, and look how close the pack is, with Kim Colby in the blue bringing up the tail end of the field. Trevor Flood there out wide on the red bike. The late part of the field, but it's Haslam up in front on H, getting another one of his good starts.
Sale in second position, Jeffrey Sale on bike 10 up in second place.
Crosby 3rd. Pretty
in 4th position.
Pretty in there.
A very brave rider. Crosby ranges up on the outside now of Jeffrey Sale. Can't do it on the outside. Will he dive to the inside? And he does. Crosby onto the banking into the 2nd position.
Graham Muir 5th. This is the pack just behind the leader. Crosby, Sale, Pretty, Graham Muir 96.
Pretty moves up into 3rd.
Powering past them.
Sale goes for the inside run again. Can't do it. That's Pretty on bike A. Graham Muir right behind him. Graham Muir, who came 2nd in the first leg today. There's Haslam in the lead. Crosby behind him. Muir around the outside of Pretty there. Oh.
Aldana's pulled up on the start-finish line as we watch the race leader, Haslam. Crosby 2nd. Muir doing a grand job there in at 3rd. Pretty 4th. Crosby 1st. Crosby up into the lead. Muir in a close 3rd place. And Pretty not far behind them. A bit of a gap back then to Jeff Sale, Ron Bolden, Dennis Neal, Gary Coleman and Lee Roebuck. But this is the leading bunch.
And look at Pretty go past Coleman. And challenging Haslam. And he does it. So Pretty into 2nd position.
Greg Hansen.
Brave ride from this man.
Greg hurt his chances, Greg Hansford, because in the first heat, perhaps he had Crosby covered.
I think he did well. I don't think Graham would have caught him in the first race, but like all he's got to do now is sit behind Graham for 4 or 5 laps and get the feel of that bike that he's on, and then he'll make his move.
Greg, coming through the S's, there was a lot of tail movement for Pretty's bike.
Well, the suspension could be different, and he might not be used to it because he's only done 1-2 laps on it now, and it's going to take a few laps for him to get the feel of the machine.
Is he still feeling pain at this stage from his leg, or is his mind switched off to it?
No, I don't think he'd be feeling anything. All he'd be feeling is trying to get past Crosby.
Graham Muir still third. Haslam slipping to fourth. Sale heading Bolden.
Bike Greg Pretty, South Australian champion. Graham Crosby in front of him. Pretty takes the smoother, the lower line rather, down into the corner there, which allegedly is the faster one.
If Pretty relaxes, he'll have Muir on him. Muir was a little bit crossed up under brakes there and is trying very hard. This bike, Pretty said, has got lower speed on the straight than his bike. Oh my goodness, he's trying hard. But better grunt in the mid-range, which should suit him. For instance, in this section here, getting out of that corner, it should be better than the bike he was riding in the first leg. Out after Graham Crosby, who, however, is pulling away from him.
He's 1.4 seconds in front at this stage.
Muir goes through in third place. A nice third. Haslam clear of Jeff Sale, Rob Bolden, Gary Coleman and Lee Roebuck.
Crosby off the main straight, out of the back of the circuit, Pretty right behind him, closing the gap slightly, I think. We'll put another watch on him at the end of this lap.
It's a ride of great determination by Greg Pretty.
1.2 seconds the gap, 0.2 of a second carved off in half a lap, so Greg Pretty is gaining.
His mother, a keen follower of his racing. And the Pitmans team, an unqualified supporter of him. And let's have a look at the sort of times being done by this gutsy little guy and very talented rider.
Greg Pretty holds the lap record here at 57.1 seconds, an average speed of 150.5 kilometres an hour.
Muir not far behind him, and he can't relax. But Crosby consolidating just a little bit, just keeping in check with Pretty by a glance over one shoulder and then another, and aware of how he must be feeling, and prepared just to tantalise him perhaps, but Pretty, on the other hand, never prepared to give up.
Pretty drops back just a little, 1.6 seconds the split then, so he's lost 0.4 of a second on that lap.
Muir, too, losing ground to the pair in front. Haslam tending to stay with them a little bit, back in fourth place. We see Pretty look over his shoulder. Behind him, Haslam's the next adversary, then Sale, Coleman, Neal and Bolden now. So positions are changing further back in the field too, where Dennis Neal's working his way up. Graham Muir would have been thrilled riding number 96 with a second place in the first heat, although nobody's ever likes to get placings by other riders falling.
And lap times come through. Graham Crosby at 57.4 seconds. That's 0.3 of a second outside Greg Pretty's lap record. Pretty's best time so far, a 57.9, half a second slower than Graham Crosby.
And he 0.8 of a second outside his own lap record and the time that he did in the first heat, because he equalled the lap record in the first heat before he fell.
Next
Crosby
lap.
there, showing how slippery it is on the drag race section as the bike starts to slide. And Greg Hansford, through that section, you're in fact sliding the back wheel out under power all the way.
Yes, well, it's very, very slippery because when the drag cars start there, they pour petrol all over the tyres and light them up and do the burnouts and everything, and that's the big problem there.
Here's the dice further back with Jeff Sale on 10, just going past Coleman on 52. Haslam
In the lead.
up in front of them in that bunch. Lee Roebuck's in there, and so too's Ron Bolden. This is a good dice, and quite a lot's been changing back there. As you saw then, Jeff Sale go by. Jeff Sale, of course, right up at the front in the early part of the race. Coleman was in front of him, but now has been retaken and swooping round them. Coleman trying to get round Sale, and does it. Underneath him, Haslam there, still leading the bunch. What a gaggle of riders, working hard.
Coming down the straight once again. On his second last lap.
Beautiful consistency from Crosby, another 57.4, lapping almost identical times, in fact identical times on a number of laps, and that's the mark of a good rider too. And I don't think there's any doubt that the man that's brought a lot of the crowds to this Swan Series this year is this lovable New Zealander, Graham Crosby. An incredible character, an incredible talent, a magnificent motorbike, that Yoshimura Suzuki 1000 Formula One bike, which for Sandown, he hopes he'll be back with an 1100cc engine. So if any Yamaha 750 thinks he's going to pass him on the big wide open spaces of Sandown, they'd better be right on form. He goes off and he's on his final lap. 2.4 kilometres to victory in this series in which he's fought so hard. Relegated to second in the second heat at Oran Park by Steve Trinder. Relegated to second in the second heat at Surfers Paradise by Greg Pretty, but victor in the first heat here and likely victor in the second, Graham Crosby.
And there's a big silver plate for each, as a prize for each round of this series. So far it hasn't been able to be presented because it couldn't be split in two for the tied heats in the last two rounds. Now Crosby gets his plate.
57.7, just dropping 3/10. Greg Pretty, 58.5. And starting this heat or equal on 33 points in second place with Coleman, so that Crosby will have now 58 points in the series, leading Greg Pretty, who will have 42. Gary Coleman, by finishing, if he does finish fourth, will have 40, and Coleman finishes fourth in front of Haslam, Jeff Sale. Dennis Neal just managed to pip Ron Bolden.
And what a fantastic finish. Back in the field there as Dennis Neal slammed through using all the power of the big CB 1100R to pass the Grand Prix 750 Yamaha of Ron Bolden. And Crosby's race time, 11 minutes, 37.9 seconds for the 12 laps of the race. There's Crosby speaking to Greg Pretty, asking him how he feels out there, both of them acknowledging the plaudits of the crowd. Crosby saying, gas it up, gas it up. And back in third position, Graham Muir. Crosby now in a fairly safe position for the final round at Sandown Park. Greg Hansford.
Yes, John, I think he could finish the two races over there.
There's the Crosby victory stand, wheel stand.
Probably as far back as fourth or fifth position and still win the series overall.
There are, however, 30 points to be taken in that final round, so Greg Pretty is still within striking distance, but it really, seriously, will take quite a deal of bad luck on Crosby's part at this stage. However, the good news is, not the series itself, but the race itself, which is going to be outstanding at Sandown Park. That long back straight of Sandown Park will really test the big Suzuki of Crosby with the slipstreaming Yamahas clawing all over him at Sandown Park. Wouldn't you agree, Greg?
Sure, it's also going to test the suspension there to the maximum too, because that back straight they're going up there at 165, 170 miles per hour, and it's very, very rough. I haven't seen it for a couple of years, but I don't imagine they've done anything to it since the last time we were there.
Of all the circuits that you've ridden at, that's the one that's tested you most in Australia, is it not?
Yes, you could be right there.
Because, of course, you've been down the road in a very big way at Sandown Park.
Yeah.
Next weekend, of course, is also the final round of the Australian Championships at Sandown, where your teammate